Selena Gomez held the title of Chief Impact Officer at a mental health startup valued at $95 million that, according to a new lawsuit, never got around to building the app. I am Lambert Woollingham, and this is the Daily Shear for Saturday, August 15th. Several institutions today discovered that saying no is a perfectly complete sentence, and used it liberally. Local news today runs through federal courtrooms as much as it runs through Austin, starting with a wall going up through a national park. A tribal non-profit and two worshippers of Lipan Apache lineage have filed a federal lawsuit seeking to halt construction of the border wall inside Big Bend National Park. The suit names Homeland Security Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen and Customs and Border Protection Commissioner Rodney Scott, arguing that survey crews and bulldozers are already restricting access to sites central to their religious practices. A violation, the plaintiffs say, of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. The case follows a February waiver in which the Trump administration set aside dozens of federal environmental and historic preservation laws to speed along a 175-mile steel barrier through West Texas. Federal contractor Kiewit is already clearing brush and laying staging pads outside Tolingua, and locals have taken to complaining about the noise, the dust, and the driving. The government's contract for the work, 30-foot panels, surveillance gear, and patrol roads runs to $1.7 billion, a number that makes the plaintiff's request for an injunction feel less like an obstacle and more like a formality on the way to a done deal. Sticking with a threat the state has been making for a while now, the Texas Education Agency released preliminary accountability ratings Friday, confirming that two Austin Independent School District middle schools, Burnett and Webb, have failed state standards for a fifth consecutive year. Those F grades legally obligate Education Commissioner Mike Morath to intervene, meaning the state must now either close the campuses or replace the district's elected school board with an appointed board of managers. Austin is the only district in Texas to trigger that mandatory takeover threshold. This cycle, an unwelcome distinction made stranger by the fact that the district's overall grade actually improved to a B. Statewide, 85% of rated campuses scored a C or higher, with Aledo and Bernie ISDs earning A's and Malone ISD posting the worst mark in the state at 44. A handful of struggling districts managed to buy themselves time. Arlington ISD pushed two campuses up to a D, and Lake Worth ISD saw modest gains, though both remain under close state oversight. In Plano, the school board voted unanimously to begin termination proceedings against Brinker Elementary principal Jennifer King, roughly a month after the arrest of former teacher Paul Campbell on abuse allegations. A civil lawsuit filed by the parents of an 8-year-old student claims King received at least one prior complaint about inappropriate touching by Campbell and failed to notify law enforcement, state child protective services, or certification authorities within the required window. The suit also alleges King denied a request to move a different child out of Campbell's classroom without ever investigating his conduct. King faces no criminal charges, and the district has not said publicly what its actual grounds for firing her are. The closed session apparently covering that too. A man who stole a Fort Worth Fire Department ambulance was shot and killed by a Texas Department of Public Safety trooper Thursday morning after a pursuit that tore through Austin. Troopers picked up the vehicle southbound on Interstate 35 in Williamson County around 6:30 a.m., and when the driver refused to stop, he began ramming civilian cars as the chase reached the Highway 290 interchange. He evaded a pit maneuver on the upper deck of Interstate 35 and kept striking surrounding traffic until a trooper fired into the cab, killing him at the scene. One motorist was taken to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries, and the southbound lane stayed closed for hours while the Texas Rangers processed the scene and assumed control of the shooting investigation. Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport scrapped its plan for Islamic foot washing stations in the international terminal on Friday, just hours after Governor Greg Abbott ordered a review of state grants and threatened a federal investigation. The airport had been weighing a $300,000 project to build ablution facilities inside restrooms on the pre-security side of Terminal D. And after what it called elevated public attention, it announced the project would not deliver the anticipated operational benefits, language doing a great deal of work there. Abbott had posted that government-owned airports cannot favor one religion over others, called the facilities illegal discrimination, and ordered a review of all active state funding to both DFW and Houston's Bush Intercontinental. He also sent a letter to Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy requesting immediate federal enforcement action on top of it. The economic docket today is less about growth than about who gets to keep growing, and it opens on a consumer who apparently ran out of enthusiasm in July. American retail sales posted their steepest monthly decline in more than a year in July, falling 0.6% to $763.6 billion after June's modest 0.2% gain, as the boost from early summer tax refunds wore off. Motor vehicle purchases dropped sharply and e-commerce cooled after the Prime Day bump faded, while the Producer Price Index's services component got revised upward for the prior month, evidence that inflation in the commercial supply chain has not gone anywhere. The retreat lands alongside a labor market that unexpectedly shed 23,000 jobs in July and a preliminary August consumer sentiment reading that kept falling. Taken together, it reads as households pulling back on anything discretionary to keep covering the basics, a detail the Federal Reserve now has to work into whatever it decides next. Old Glory Bank walked away from a reverse merger that would have taken it public on the NASDAQ, blaming the Federal Reserve for sitting on the deal. The Oklahoma Bank had agreed to combine with Digital Asset Acquisition Corp. In a transaction valuing the combined entity at $250 million, and the Securities and Exchange Commission had already approved the registration statement. But the Fed never authorized the holding company application the bank filed back in February. The plan would have reincorporated the business in Texas under the ticker OGB and raised at least $50 million in new financing. After repeated delays to the shareholder vote, the two sides signed a mutual termination agreement, including a non-disparagement clause and no breakup fee, and Old Glory will now remain privately held, technically no worse off, just $50 million lighter in ambition. The California Gig Workers Union is closing in on formal certification as the exclusive bargaining representative for Uber and Lyft drivers statewide, with the state expected to finalize its status within 30 days. Certification would force both companies to the table over base pay, deactivation appeals, and working conditions, sidestepping the independent contractor classifications that has kept them out of standard labor obligations for years. Uber and Lyft have spent hundreds of millions of dollars over the past 5 years on ballot initiatives and lobbying specifically to prevent this outcome. Once certified, the union gets the standing to demand financial disclosures and negotiate binding contracts, and labor organizers already have New York and Illinois picked out as the next stops. The Los Angeles Lakers were valued at $12.5 billion this week in a minority stake sale, clearing the previous benchmarks set by recent National Football League and National Basketball Association franchise deals. The number relies less on ticket sales or operations than on the assumption that broadcasting rights keep escalating forever and that private equity keeps showing up to underwrite the bet. Individual billionaires are increasingly priced out of this market entirely, which is why leagues have started adjusting ownership rules to admit sovereign wealth funds and investment syndicates instead. Buyers are not really pricing a basketball team anymore. They are pricing a scarce media asset that happens to occasionally play basketball. Wired reports that the Federal Trade Commission quietly negotiated private deals letting several auto dealerships ignore federal court orders that prohibited credit discrimination. The agency suspended enforcement against dealers accused of charging Black and Hispanic customers higher financing markups, and did so without notifying the judges overseeing the cases or at least one of its own co-plaintiffs in the original litigation. Auto lenders routinely let dealers mark up interest rates and keep the difference, a practice regulators have previously shown produces steep pricing disparities regardless of a buyer's actual creditworthiness. The FTC's administrative waivers shield the dealerships from contempt proceedings entirely, undercutting in private what the agency insists in public it enforces. The wider world today moves through a contested election, a cancelled celebrity venture, and a courtroom guilty plea, and it opens with ballots that had to be recounted after an attack in Lusaka. Zambia's electoral commission suspended and then restarted its presidential ballot count Friday after officials were attacked at polling stations and boxes of marked ballots were stolen. Riot police and military units in armoured vehicles moved into Lusaka to secure the main tallying centre, and police say one political party official was killed at a polling station during Thursday's vote, leading to 9 arrests so far. The commission has not identified who orchestrated the ballot theft, notable given that Zambia has generally kept its electoral transitions peaceful since going multi-party in 1991. Electoral Commission head Mwangala Zalumis authorised the count to resume once the immediate security threat was declared contained, while opposition candidate Brian Munjibile says he was interrogated by the military and has publicly questioned the integrity of the results. 5 investors have sued Selena Gomez, her mother Mandy Teefey, and their startup Wondermind Global, alleging fraud over the venture's collapse. The plaintiffs, who put in $1.2 million collectively, claim they were told a mobile app was already in development, along with celebrity cover stories and corporate partnerships with JP Morgan Chase and Fidelity, none of which they say materialized. The suit leans on Gomez's formal title at the company, Chief Impact Officer, arguing she never used her 500 million social media followers to drive the user growth the founders had promised, while the startup missed payments to employees and vendors and never built the platform at all. Former business partner Daniela Pearson, who left in 2023, is also named as a defendant and has publicly denied the allegations. And the whole thing rested on a $95 million valuation that, in hindsight, described mostly a following count. A federal judge in Washington denied the Tohono O'odham Nation's request to halt border wall construction across its 2.8 million acre reservation in Arizona. United States District Judge Richard Leon ruled Friday that the administration can build 62 miles of steel barrier without the tribe's consent, finding that immigration enforcement and public safety outweigh the harms the tribe described, including the destruction of sacred sites and desert ecosystems. The government's legal basis traces back to a 1907 proclamation by Theodore Roosevelt, establishing a 60-foot buffer along the international boundary, a rule that predates the tribe's modern legal standing by decades. Tribal chairman Verlon Jose said the ruling disregards the project's permanent environmental and cultural devastation, and construction is expected to proceed without further judicial obstruction for now. Representative Russell Fry, who finished third in Tuesday's special primary, endorsed Senator Darline Graham on Friday in the runoff to fill the remainder of her late brother Lindsey Graham's Senate term. Graham was appointed to the seat after her brother's sudden death last month and took a plurality in the primary, but not the majority needed to avoid an August 25th runoff against Representative Ralph Norman. Trump passed over Fry's own bid to endorse Graham despite once calling Fry an outstanding choice, and Senator Tim Scott has also lined up behind her. Graham has built her campaign heavily around her brother's legacy as one of Trump's most reliable allies in the Senate. Luigi Mangione pleaded guilty to federal stalking charges in the December 2024 killing of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, appearing in Manhattan federal court in a beige jail uniform. He admitted to posing as an investor to gather information on a corporate conference before ambushing Thompson with a 3D printed firearm fitted with a silencer, telling Judge Margaret Garnett he traveled to New York specifically intending to kill him. The federal plea resolves that portion of the case and leaves him facing a potential life sentence at sentencing on December 18th, but it complicates his separate New York State murder trial, where jury selection is set to begin next month. His defense has already asked State Judge Gregory Caro to dismiss the murder charge, arguing the state prosecution now amounts to double jeopardy. What I keep returning to is DFW's own explanation for killing the foot washing stations, that they would not deliver the anticipated operational benefits, as though the original proposal had run actual numbers on clean feet versus tile costs. I have to assume there is a binder somewhere ranking every terminal amenity by operational benefit, water fountains, moving walkways, the little unused chapel by Gate 12, and it is only a matter of time before one of those scores too low and gets discovered to be exclusionary too. The vending machines seem next, given that Terminal D's snack selection unfairly favours people who eat food. Somewhere in that terminal, there is a plumber standing next to an unopened box of fixtures, waiting to find out which outcome he is actually installing. Old Glory Bank and its would-be NASDAQ partner signed a mutual non-disparagement clause on their way out the door, which means the public will simply never learn what either side actually thinks happened to that $250 million valuation. That is the count for today, and no, I will not be checking back on whether Terminal D's vending machines survive the week. Lambert Woollingham. The day has been shorn. Until tomorrow.